Hello, everyone. Today we will be talking about digital mental health, specifically a product from a company called Akili, which is a leader in the digital mental health space that has made a product for treating ADHD. You can probably predict that I'm pretty excited about this because honestly, I've never wanted to do traditional CBT for my ADHD because it sounds hard and boring. And I know that's totally pathetic and you guys shouldn't listen to me and should definitely get therapy. But also, medications don't work well with me because I'm hypersensitive to amphetamines. So knowing that there is another option out there is really cool. So I'm just going to briefly introduce our guests and then actually turn it over to Kibby because she's really been getting to know this space. So first of all, we have Adam Ghazali coming on. He's an MD PhD, is the David Dolby Distinguished Professor of Neurology, Physiology, and Psychiatry, and the founder and executive director of Neuroscape at the University of California, San Francisco. He's co-founder of Akili and Jazz Venture Partners. He's filed multiple patents, authored over 180 scientific articles, and delivered over 700 invited presentations around the world. Pretty badass bio. We also have Scott Collins. He's a PhD, a licensed clinical psychologist in the state of North Carolina, and spent more than 20 years on the faculty in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Duke University School of Medicine. He's still an adjunct faculty here. Scott Collins has been ranked among the top 100 psychiatry faculty members in the U.S. with respect to NIH funding and also served as principal investigator on more than 50 industry-funded clinical trials. So we've got some pretty heavy hitters coming on this podcast to talk about their product. Kibby, can you tell us more about the digital mental health space?
I'm really excited to talk to these guys. I've really started to delve into the digital mental health space since finishing postdoc, because especially around COVID, it just became really clear that so many people have mental health issues and they're growing by the minute. And there's really not enough treatment out there, right? People have a really hard time finding a therapist that takes insurance, that's affordable. Do you like your therapist, right? There's not enough therapists out there. So I think in the tech world, they've tried to solve that problem by saying, okay, how can we address this gap, right? There's so many people who need help, not enough help out there. Can therapy or treatment look different than what we're used to? We're used to kind of like this medication and individual therapy with the therapist. But can it look like something different? Can we take what we know about the brain and mental health and actually make software like an app that helps you, video game, which Akili does, or, an AI chatbot, right? So there's all these different kind of creative ways that people are trying to tackle this. And it's kind of a wild west out there. I'll admit, like there's a lot of people, a lot of companies are just they're just trying to get something out there to help. And some are good and some are, room for improvement. But Akili it's a really special company, one that I've paid attention to for a while because they actually use the research. They are really, really good at really, getting psychologists and researchers and people who know mental health from the ground up, and also designers and gamers and everything like that, like game designers. And they did something groundbreaking where they got FDA approval for their treatment, their video game to treat ADHD in kids. And that's a big deal. Like it sounds like, you might not know how important that is, but basically it says that this is an actual treatment that doctors can prescribe their patients and insurance companies can pay for. So I think this is the first video game that's ever have FDA approval for mental health.
Hey, I had no idea that the FDA gave approval for video games.
They do now because of Akili. So there we go.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Let's bring him in. Here are Scott and Adam. Well, so once again, we are so lucky to have here Adam Ghazali and Scott Collins from Akili, and they are here to talk about Endeavor OTC, a video game treatment to improve attention in adults with ADHD, something I know I personally would be very grateful to experience. So Adam and Scott, can you introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about Endeavor?
Sure. Well, Maybe I'll just start with my intro, and Scott could get really under the hood. My name is Adam Ghazali. I'm a professor at UCSF. I am the person that had this crazy idea for a video game that improves attention 15 years ago. I won't break down everything that happened over those years, or we'll have multiple hours of podcasts. But the general idea is that the brain responds to experience through this process known as neuroplasticity. And if you can create a very high level, targeted, challenging, hopefully rewarding and enjoyable experience, you could change the brain and improve function. And so that's the sort of inspiration behind this game that's now available to everyone to see a benefit from. And my day job is at a university. I'm at University of California, San Francisco, but I'm one of the co-founders and board members at Akili, and super excited to see this get out into the world. So I'll leave it at that and pass it over to Scott.
Thanks, Adam. So I'm Scott Collins. I am a clinical psychologist by training. I am the chief medical officer at Akili, but I've been familiar and worked with the company for about 10 of those 15 years that Adam talked about. So before joining Akili in December, I spent the vast majority of my career as an academic also at Duke, where you guys are in the Department of Psychiatry. I ran a specialty program for kids and adults with ADHD, and we did lots of clinical trials. So we had this startup company come to us in 2013, this guy from UCSF that had started a company with another guy with a venture fund. Anyway, these guys came and said, we want to do a clinical trial with a video game treatment for kids with ADHD. And I said, well, okay, if you're going to sponsor this and if you're going to let us do proper science to evaluate it, then we're game to do it. And we did that. The results of that proof of concept study were positive. And that was sort of a go, no-go decision for the company to then pursue regulation for this product and to actually get it cleared by the Food and Drug Administration as a medical device. And in order to do that, we had to do some pretty large scale rigorous clinical trials to evaluate it. We did that. We did two what are called phase 3 pivotal studies. Those formed the basis of submitting to the FDA, which we did in about 2018. And then the device got approved for use in kids with ADHD in June of 2020. So we've had a product on the market for a couple years. We've continued to do lots of research and studies. We did a study with really, really good results, actually better than what we saw in the kids for adolescents age 13 to 17. Sent an application in, which is in front of the FDA right now, to take that initial product that was on the market as a prescription product and get it approved for kids up to age 17. And then a couple months later, so this is back in early May, we announced the results of an adult study that was even better than the adolescent study. So it kind of blew us away in terms of the magnitude of effects. And we said, the FDA process is super important. It's important to us as a company to kind of distinguish what we have as really evidence-based, standardized, and high quality. But we also said that process takes time. And so we want to do something to get this product into the hands of patients as quickly as possible. So we launched last week, actually. We launched Endeavor OTC, which is our product for adults. Still same, I mentioned the quality and the standardization. That still exists, but we have released this to the public while we are developing our submission to the FDA.
Wow, cool. Just to back up for a second, I mean, I could even, picture that a lot of people are like, wait, a treatment that's a video game? Come on. For ADHD? Come on, right? Like, it's super appealing for me because, I've talked about this on this podcast before. I have ADHD and I'm also a huge gamer. So I'm like, yes, please. But tell us a little bit about, like, why not medication? Why not any other treatments out there? I mean, for people who are probably new to, digital therapeutics, it might seem crazy to treat a disorder with a video game, right?
Well, I want Adam to take off on this because I know he'll be excited to answer. But I will say that the path that we have carved as a company, that is the reaction that we're we're familiar with. We're familiar with them from, especially I remember when I was still working at Duke and working with Akili, trying to keep the FDA regulators' heads from exploding as we went to present them data to say we want you to regulate and approve for marketing a software device that's actually a video game. Mm-hmm. So this is groundbreaking, and the FDA recognized that it was groundbreaking. But Adam, this is your baby and has been for a long time. So I'll let you run with that.
Yeah, I'll give a high level, and Scott could give a lot of important details about ADHD specifically, and the other thing, the other treatments that are offered, and what's the good and the bad about them, and where this fills an important role in the treatment of ADHD. He's the ADHD expert, so I'm not going to talk about that. But from a high level, why would we think about technology, and specifically a video game, as a treatment for any disorder of our minds, whether it's ADHD? We also have work on depression and anxiety and early Alzheimer's and beyond. And, what about meds? Isn't that what we have available? And why wouldn't we just continue down that road? So to answer that, I can answer it in a couple different ways. First, let's talk about the status quo and what we've been doing us humans, around the world. All of us have been, for the last 7 years, trying to find drugs, pills, molecules, all the same thing to fix our brains, really. I mean, that's the mission we've been on. And we've had this dream and this hope that there was some miracle brain pill out there that you would just take in the morning, nice and easy when you brush your teeth, depression gone, autism gone, schizophrenia gone, Alzheimer's gone, right? That's what we want. It's nice and easy. And we have pills for other things. We have pills for our heart and infectious disease and treatments for cancer. It really fit the model of what we want, and I get it. But it has failed. There are certainly individuals that are helped, but overall, we've seen, decrease in death and suffering from cardiac disease, infectious disease, cancer, and the reverse trend has occurred for afflictions of the mind, anxiety, depression, suicide rates, dementia in seniors, ADHD are going in the wrong direction. So the one big picture is that we need to do better. And, COVID has made it all worse. It's a global problem. You and your listeners are probably very in touch with that message. So that's the first thing, is that we can't just hope that we're going to find a pill to fix it all. Our pills work sometimes. They don't work perfectly. People have side effects. We need to do better. So that's one message. Specifically about technology and video games, this is a complicated one. I know better than anyone because I wrote an entire book on this topic called The Distracted Mind, Ancient Brains in a High-Tech World, all about how technology challenges our brains, and it's getting more so. And we see, in addition to things like privacy and security issues that make us all now be like, oh, technology is not all good, this also challenges on our mood, anxiety, multitasking leads to all sorts of performance and safety issues. Social media has all sorts of challenges. And so it's a real thing to say, hey, technology, as exciting as it is not so great for us all the time and really challenges us. And I talk about that topic a lot, and it's a real one, and it's still here, and it's worth being grounded in the reality that technology has challenged us, and it will continue to. But all things that can do harm can do good, and likewise do good, do harm. And this has always been the case for human technologies. I mean, fire could cook your food or burn your house down, right? And drugs could be poison or be cures, and food can be good or bad food. So it's not surprising to think of technology in both ways, that it can harm us if we use it thoughtlessly, unintentionally, if we allow it to control our lives, or we could flip it around and think about how can technology be a tool to actually help us. And so that's the bridge, right? That these tools, when thoughtfully developed, with knowledge from neuroscience, which is what we've been doing for a long time, and carefully validated in research studies like we've done and Scott's done, and then monitored over time to make sure it's actually working and not causing harm. That's also important, and only time will continue to show that. We believe that technology tools can improve us as humans and really help our brains in lots of ways, specifically in this way for improving attention. And we have dozens of papers, in addition to the big, important clinical trials that Scott mentioned in different populations, showing that the challenges and rewards that this video game delivers to its players improves attention abilities, and that's across multiple populations. And it does so, I'll conclude here, it does so by harnessing this really amazing aspect of our brain called plasticity, that everything about the brain, its structure, its function, its physiology, its chemistry, all of it changes in response to experience. And this exists throughout our entire lifespan, and it is the basis of all learning. And so, it could seem very strange and even magical, like a video game inducing these benefits, but at its core, it's one of the strongest fundamental aspects of modern day neuroscience, is that this is how the brain works, and it will respond to a challenge, and it could go in a bad way, as many experiences do. PTSD is a perfect example of an experience leading to a negative impact on your brain that detrimentally impacts the rest of your life. This is the opposite. This is an example of an experience that can positively change your brain to lead to very good and enduring outcomes. So I'll leave it at that as the sort of big picture of why a video game is a medical treatment.
If I can jump in for a quick sec, sorry.
All you, Scott.
Give you guys a chance to get a word in, but I warned you, Kibby. But the just to bring it back to ADHD too, one of the reasons that I left academia is that I felt like that the work we were doing there was not having impact fast enough. I was hired by a guy at Duke in the year 2000. He had done the very first randomized study of methylphenidate, which is Ritalin, for kids, which were then called hyperkinetic, in 1963. And guess what our frontline treatment for ADHD still is today?
Really?
Methylphenidate and amphetamines. Yeah, we haven't changed it in 60 years. Mm-hmm. And first studies of behavior therapy were published for ADHD in the 70s. Still frontline treatment. And guess what? Our outcomes haven't changed. My son, my 13-year-old, he was diagnosed on the autism spectrum when he was about 2, diagnosed with ADHD when he was about 6. And statistically speaking, his prognosis is about the same as a kid that was born 40, 50 years ago. Our treatments haven't evolved at all. So we've got to do something different than the status quo. And so what Adam, and the work that him and his lab and others in the field have been doing to bring this innovation, and we're just talking about ADHD, like Adam said. I mean, there are applications, whether it's video games or other digital tools, to all sorts of other mental health conditions that we've got to embrace, and we really got to think about how to push the innovation out.
Could you tell me what this basically looks like? So are we talking about, I get prescribed Endeavor OTC. Is this something that I play every day? Do I just play it until I master it? Like, what is the game like?
So you don't get, for the adult product, you don't need a prescription. You can go to the App Store today. Ooh. I will send you a follow-up email with some special goodies. But you download it from right now, because we really quickly got it out there. It's only available for iOS, but we're working quickly to get it available for Android devices too. You download it and you get started. And what we studied in our clinical trial was a regimen that was about 25 minutes a day, 5 days a week for 6 weeks. And we saw, like I said, we saw really remarkable results. We saw improvements in attention. We saw improvements in patients reporting on their own quality of life. That was the thing I was most excited about, because one of the things that we've gotten a little blowback from in the past with our product is we've chosen to study the effects of our treatment on a computerized measure of attention. Makes sense. It's an attention treatment. And people say, well, what is that? What's the relevance of that for me in my day-to-day life? When you ask an adult what is their quality of life on a validated measure, that's where the rubber meets the road in terms of clinical relevance. So we got really good improvements. Now, I think a lot of people say, whoa, 25 minutes a day, 5 days a week, 6 weeks, that seems like a lot. It is. We saw in our study that you can get benefits with less. That's the optimal benefits, but we've certainly starting to get some evidence, and we'll be getting this out that, to make more specific recommendations about, where you can play. But you can it doesn't have to be all 25 minutes at one time. You got 10 minutes here, 15 minutes there. That works. It's a matter of just, continuing to go back to kind of leverage what Adam was talking about with the brain plasticity.
Cool. I mean, 25 minutes a day seems reasonable. I mean, I'm spending hours playing Zelda. It's probably more embarrassing than to admit, but what about your products, or what about your video games is special? I don't know if you could say it, this is the secret sauce, but there are so many video games out there that are pretty hard. I mean, I've spent hours trying to master just like one weapon in Zelda. What about your video game actually, does its magic?
Yeah, I could handle that one. There are a couple of things here. First of all, I'd like to say that there is a scientific literature that's showing that consumer and entertainment video games can improve cognitive abilities. And I was actually inspired by that research 15 years ago. There's a lot of data, for example, first-person shooters. Some people have trouble with them for their content, but the data is pretty convincing that the challenges these games offer lead to improvements in cognition in children, usually teens that play them. And the idea, so, again, it's fitting with the bigger picture that our brain responds to experience through plasticity and can change its function. And if a game is challenging your attention, any game, you could see benefits. But the games weren't designed for that outcome. And so one of the big rationales back, in the day when we started developing the game that became Endeavor is, let's say we actually tried to build a video game to improve cognition. What would we do? And the first things we do is create a game environment where the mechanics and the challenges and the rewards of the game were directly focused on different neural systems that we know through our research in cognitive neuroscience that we want to improve that are associated with attention. So the first thing is that the methodology, essentially the active ingredient of our medicine is the mechanics, how the rewards and challenges are woven together, how you have to hold your attention, avoid distraction, move your attention rapidly, bring it back rapidly, only being rewarded when that happens in a certain way. That was very specifically designed and then tested over many years as being an ideal way of challenging the brain to lead to an improvement in attention. So that's one element. We also engaged a system that we called a closed loop system. So what that means is that the game is constantly reading out data about your performance in real time, like 10 times a second, and then uses that data to update the challenges and rewards in an appropriate and personalized way for you. That's really important part of our medicine, because what it does is it creates essentially the optimal personal trainer, right? So if you've ever had a personal trainer or gone to a gym, just going by yourself could be pretty hard. But having a personal trainer is if that's good, let's go 5 pounds heavier. Or you're having a bad day, let's back it down. I don't want you to hurt yourself. That's essentially what the algorithms do automatically. So they push you to the level of your ability, which maximally harnesses the brain's plasticity, but not so far that you just give up, and not too easy where you're bored. And so that's not true in most other video games. And so you give a video game to a child with ADHD or an older adult with dementia, or someone that might not have a lot of game experience, and they're like, this is too hard for me. Our game just finds that sweet spot. So both the mechanics and the closed loop system are two very unique aspects of our game that are part of our development process and part of how we, create this as an actual medicine.
Yeah, and I like to also really emphasize something that Adam just said about this. The video game part of this is our tool for engagement. The key ingredient is everything that Adam just described, because it is hard. And our most commonly reported side effect in all of our studies is frustration, especially in the kids, because they're like, this is not, this isn't Mario Kart. I'm getting angry at watching my son play this. It's like, okay, I saw that, but that is by design, and that you have to kind of push through that. So that's really important. I try to emphasize this is a treatment first in a video game, to kind of keep people coming back and make it something a little bit more engaging.
Yeah, maybe just a little riff on that. I think the medicine here is the experience. I think of this as experiential medicine. So that's like our version of the molecule, and the video game's like our version of the pill itself, right? It's how we deliver it to you. There's lots of ways of delivering a molecule. You could do sublingual, you could do nasal, you could do an injection, you could take a pill. This is how we're delivering our experience to you, but it's valuable, right? The fact that it's fun and engaging makes you play deeply, which helps change your brain, and also makes you come back, which is critical because you're not going to do it in one session. So it's like the video game is really an important part of this, but it's that experience that it's delivering that's really the medicine.
So, do you all know the dopamine hypothesis of ADHD? Okay, so I mean, basically, the people with ADHD have lower levels of dopamine, and so we need more rewarding activities in order to be motivated. So I'm wondering how that relates, because a lot of people say that people with ADHD have the ability to hyperfocus when something is rewarding enough. And so that would suggest that actually like attention and focus is not maybe the main problem. It's like demotivation or boredom or something. And so how, I guess, does that relate to neuroplasticity? And I guess what I'm wondering is like, if people with ADHD can hyperfocus when they're playing like really fun video games, does that then translate over though to when they're doing something boring, like writing a paper?
Yeah. I'll take a crack at that, Adam.
I'll go after you.
having spent a lot of time thinking about dopamine and ADHD and doing PET imaging studies to study dopamine transporter occupancy in ADHD patients. But what I usually talk to patients and caregivers about in terms of, I think attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is actually a little bit of a misnomer, because it's not a pure deficit, as you just described, Jacqueline. I mean, I see patients, I see in my son, you get him on his MetaQuest, on his VR, and left to his own devices, he would be there for 8 hours. So it's not really a deficit. It is a matter of controlling and regulating the attention to the proper things that sort of are adaptive for the environment. And that is, in part, that's what dopamine helps to regulate. So there is still, I do think that there's still, there's merit to thinking about this from a kind of a purely neurotransmitter based kind of approach. And that's in part why we think, although we still don't know for sure, but that's why we think that stimulant medication has the effects that it has, is that it allows, it doesn't just like fill in the gap of a deficit, but it syncs up those attentional networks in the brain so that you can sort of, if I listen to my teacher or if I listen to my parents, that then becomes a source of additional reward, that is going to be motivating for me. And so I lost the thread on the question, because you were saying, like, how does that then, are you asking? Yeah, go ahead.
So I guess what I'm saying is like, if kids with ADHD are already playing video games, are those kids now able to control their attention with more boring tasks, or are they only able to pay attention in the video game because it's really rewarding and interesting? And then how does your video game solve that problem?
Got it. Yeah, I think, well, so I'll let Adam chime in too, but I think that we haven't studied other video games, and I don't know that there have been very many, even with some of the gaming literature. I don't know that they've studied ADHD specifically, and certainly not in kids. But what I would say is that it gets back to kind of the specificity of mechanism that Adam talked about. Is this treatment was designed from the bottom up to specifically target the kinds of cognitive control systems that we know are disrupted in ADHD. Whereas most video games are designed top down, like here's something that should be entertaining and engaging, but it might serendipitously hit on some of these other cognitive systems. But I wouldn't expect my N of one son, his homework and ability to focus on his schoolwork has not been helped by his increasing focus on video games.
Maybe I'll add one extra flavor to that, but I agree with everything Scott said, and that's specifically your point about what we call transfer in my field, transfer of benefits, meaning what you're doing here needs to lead to a benefit over there. Because if you only get better at the game, like that's great, but not enough, right? That's not what we're looking for, especially for a medical treatment. So this particular game was designed starting 15 years ago to challenge the brain in such a way to lead to that transfer benefit. And we have dozens of papers that support that conclusion, including our first big publication in the journal Nature, cover of Nature in 2013 in older adults, a very, very different population, but same finding. And the finding is really quite remarkable, I think, and one that I just want to pause on because it is the direct answer to your question. So the game is full of colors. It's full of rewards. You're constantly moving your attention. It feels like the most crazy wild video game you've played. Like it has a lot going on. It certainly doesn't feel slow moving, or in any way different than a lot of fast-paced action video games. But what we have found in many, many studies, and this was the hypothesis from the very beginning, that if you get better at a game like this, that's designed in this way with the closed loop system, when we then take you out of that environment and put you in a boring environment, you will be able to hold your attention better than you ever have before and were able to in the past. And that's exactly what we showed. And that's why it was the primary outcome in the big phase 3 pivotal trials that Scott led and all the studies that we've done at Neuroscape, because that is the transfer benefit that we want to show. And so our outcome measure is this super boring test of sustained attention, also called the vigilance task, that has no feedback, no colors, no rewards, no multitasking. And we want to see how well you can focus on that before and then after this gameplay. So the game could not be any more different than the test. And we look at all sorts of measures, like how well you can hold your attention on that boring game by your response time, how quickly you respond, and also how steadily you can hold your attention over time, how much variance is there in your response time. And that's what gets better. So by revving up this attentional system in the gameplay, what we have shown, and if we didn't show this, we wouldn't be on this podcast with you right now. What we've showed is that, you get better at the game, and then you also get better at holding your attention in super boring tasks, which we think is that step to the real world of being at school or, trying to manage your daily life, which is why we're starting to see some of that benefits in behavior. But yes, improving this cognitive system and the neuroscience, we don't have to go deep in this, is that the prefrontal cortex, the most evolved part of our brain and the most, the latest part of our brain to develop, is in charge of this function of holding your attention when you make the decision to. And it's that part of the brain and its network with the rest of the brain that improves after gameplay. And we've showed this in multiple populations. And it's that allows you to then say, okay, I'm not in the game anymore. I know my job on this task is to hold my attention to, there's a really boring cue, and you do better at it, way better at it than you did beforehand. So I hope that fills in that gap for you. Cool.
That's cool. I'm wondering too, this might get into the research methods that you guys have done, but when people play this game, do they need to know that it's a treatment for ADHD, or is it like if they're going in expecting the treatment for ADHD, there might be a placebo effect? But if they're just given like, hey, this is a fun game, why don't you play it for a while? Do you still see the same benefits, or?
Oh, there's a couple of different things that come to mind for that. So in our phase 3 study, we spent a lot of time and effort thinking about how do we reduce that potential bias or the expectation or the placebo effect. And we had in our first study, we had a control condition, and that control condition was a game. It was actually a spelling game. And we had actually done some market research and asked parents before we exposed that control condition and said, if your kid took this, do you think it would have benefit? And they were like, oh yeah, I think that might have some benefit. So we thought, okay, this is a reasonable control. And when we did the study and we looked at the effects of the treatment, we saw massive effects on this measure of attentional control, the real boring task. And there was no placebo effect at all on that task, which is kind of what you expect to see on an objective, computer-based task. Now, there were other measures that we used, like behavior rating scales and things like that, we did see placebo effects there. So we saw people that, but we still saw some differences between the treatment and the control. But those are that's like any clinical trial in mental health. The primary outcome measures are usually you ask people how you feel, and there's always placebo effects. So we actually have the benefit with this treatment and with this outcome measure in our studies, we had no placebo effect, which gives us, confidence that it's really, the treatment's doing what we expect it to do.
Maybe one other way of answering that, I agree everything Scott said. All of the studies we run have these, we call expectancy match placebo groups. And so we always run other video games where people think they're going to have sometimes they think they're actually going to have a bigger outcome, because we use games like Brain Trainee or and so then we have to actually overcome the placebo effect with our treatment. And we've seen that quite a few times. But a different way of answering this, because Scott already answered that perfectly, is that you don't really have to know what the game is doing to get its benefits. This is an important differentiator from a lot of therapies, even like cognitive behavioral therapy, where the treatment is like you are involved in trying to, improve some aspect of your thinking, your mood, your behavior, and you're really focused on how am I acting, what am I thinking about while I'm doing this, am I giving negative thoughts, and it's just a very different type of treatment compared to ours, where you're not learning anything per se. So after you get the benefits, you can't go back and say, my attention is better because this thing changed. Like you don't know it. It's sort of like when you go to the gym and you work out and you get stronger, you get more endurance. You can't really describe why your muscle's stronger. You know what you did to get there, but it's not didactic. It's not a learning in that same way. It just trains the system. It improves the processing, and the benefits are then evident. And so it's very, very different than what someone might think about as a therapy in that more traditional sense, like a talk therapy, a cognitive behavioral therapy, in that, if you're given this, you just play the game, and then that's the outcome. You don't have to know anything about the prefrontal cortex or cognitive control systems or closed loop methodology. You just play the game, and then it leads to that outcome.
I just to also riff on that for a second too. One of the things that is, I think, really important to keep in mind, and we saw this in our kid studies, we've seen it in our adult study, the degree to which somebody's attentional control problems like rear their heads in everyday life, they vary from, the two of you guys have talked about having ADHD. I would venture to say you probably got some commonalities in how that, affects your day-to-day functioning, but you've also got unique ways that affects you. So every single person that's affected by ADHD is going to have their attention impacting their life in different ways. And so it's fascinating to me talking to parents who are in the study and patients that have used the product, my own personal experience with my son, and hearing some of the things that we hear from our adult patients. It varies in the way that improvement in attentional control shows up in helpful ways. It's fascinating, and it's very idiosyncratic. And fortunately, we figured out kind of a good way to try to measure that in at least in our kid clinical studies. We just asked parents, like, what are the things that are most impairing for your kid? Because for some it's school, for some it's peer relationships, for some it's getting ready for school in the morning or home stuff. And when you have people honed in, like, this is my bugaboo, when intentional control improves, that usually is going to tend to be what shows the improvement, most notably.
So, I mean, it sounds like, first of all, this game is more fun and accessible than CBT, and that those would be two advanced.
Hey, CBT can be fun, Jeff. But yes, this seems a bit more fun.
I mean, this is a totally pathetic admission, but like, I have ADHD and I should really do something about it. But like, the therapy for ADHD just sounds like something my ADHD brain does not want to do. So I'm like already seeing how this would be beneficial. Why do you think CBT is, I mean, why are medicines the frontline treatment instead of CBT? I know it probably in combination that's better, but it sounds like there's something that's gone wrong with CBT for ADHD, or it just has been lacking. And what's the advantage of your game?
All right. We're running a risk of massive soapbox of me climbing up on here because this is also, I mean, frankly, this is a reason why I wanted to, join Akili to have the impact that we're having. And I'll tell you, we it's fun and exciting, and Adam and I and the rest of the team at Akili, like, we are convinced and passionate that we are making a huge impact. Not everybody believes that, and not everybody, even in the academic community, even with the rigor of our studies, believes that. And we've got a lot of heat for abusing the FDA process because FDA doesn't really care if a product has efficacy, on and on and on. So I really do feel strongly about this. And a lot of times some of the heat that we've gotten is patients with ADHD should stick with frontline treatments, medication, behavior therapy. Medication, the reason it's frontline treatment, frankly, is that every single clinical study, and I did dozens of them when I was at Duke, that has gotten a drug approved to be used for ADHD, uses the same primary outcome, and it's a symptom measure of ADHD. It doesn't at all tap into what I was just talking about with those idiosyncratic differences and impairments and the way that the symptoms impact functioning. So medications get approved. They work really well at changing symptoms in the short term. There's very inconclusive evidence about long-term effects, positive effects of medication. Most people who go on medication stop taking it within a year. So that's on the medication side. And there's also side effects and other things. Now, medication has its place in the care for ADHD for sure, but not in and of itself, not as a monotherapy. Behavior therapy, also critically important. It's interesting. Love to talk some more about like what your ADHD brain thinks about when you think about therapy, because I think it is aversive for some people. It can be monotonous. It can be, it can be uncomfortable in some ways. That I tell parents or adults, like, our treatment, again, I don't want to overhype, like, this is not going to be playing, Call of Duty all day long. It's hard, and it gets harder because it's exercising your brain, but going to therapy is also hard. Behavior therapy for ADHD has tons and tons of support. Dozens of studies have been published. The problem is that when you go to get behavior therapy or CBT or other modalities, what you get out in the real world looks nothing like what's used in those studies to tout the evidence for it. And this is another really, really important thing that I think gets underemphasized. The importance of having a regulated product is that every single person that gets Endeavor OTC or Endeavor RX is getting the exact same product every single time. It works the same. The mechanism that Adam talked about is exactly the same. If I go get behavior, and I've, again, done this with my son, if I go to get behavior therapy, it's not the same behavior therapy that we rendered in a clinical study at Duke. And a lot of it, frankly, is crap. And so you're not, there's no check on the fidelity or the quality. So, so that I think, sorry, like I said, I get pretty fired up about this because I do think that the frontline treatments for ADHD, they're completely inadequate, and we need innovation. And so when you get arguments that, well, your product isn't really effective, and and behavior therapy is better, like, that's not the real world. That's not and this, by the way, is also true for other conditions, for depression and anxiety. So I think that being able to deliver a treatment that we know is effective, that is inherently safe, that is delivered the exact same way every single time is, it's a big innovation.
Yeah, that's
right,
cool.
Stepping off soapbox now.
I mean, you too give a really compelling argument for this, because it's like, it almost sounds like too good to be true. And especially with I don't know if listeners out there have experienced this, but the medication shortage, that it's just hard to get Adderall and Vyvanse and Ritalin, and people are going nuts. We're looking for this. There's like Reddit threads about this.
Yep.
But even, when you mentioned, Scott, a couple times that you have a son with ADHD, and a lot of our listeners have loved ones with ADHD. Either they're married to someone, or they have a kid, or they struggle with it, but also their partner struggles with it. Talk to them for a second. What can they expect? Like, let's say they're like, oh my gosh, I heard this podcast episode. Download this game right away. It will fix all of our problems. Like, what can they expect? There are some of the benefits, some of the changes, and what are some caveats that people might get a little excited about?
Yeah, so I'll start with the caveats. I mean, this treatment, and again, I think Adam described it really nicely before. It's not going to be like an in-your-face rush of neurotransmitters like you get with medication, where you might see if you can see effects sometimes day one taking the medication if the dose is right. Mm-hmm. You're not necessarily going to see that. It's going to take a little bit of time, and we try in for both of our products for kids and adults, we try to have our onboarding and messaging set up those expectations. But I think that I would like to emphasize too that it's that individualized kind of impairment where I would encourage people take a little bit of thought. What are the 2 or 3 things where the biggest complaint? Ask your partner, or talk to your kid and say, what are the 1 or 2 or 3 things that you would like to change? Kind of like what you would do in therapy, like set your targets and keep an eye on those, because that's what you would expect. Now, I'll tell you my direct experience with my son. First of all, it freaked me out a little bit, because I was like, I did these studies and I believe in this product strongly, and I went to work for the company, but what if I don't see anything in my own son? This is going to be weird. And I didn't take my own advice that I just said, and neither did my wife. But about a week in, I started noticing a very specific change, which happens to be a big impairment for my son. And that is, at the end of the day, when his medication wears off, it is almost impossible for him to sit at the dinner table. And we try to have dinner as much as possible when we're together and like carry on a conversation. He also does not like to talk about school or anything social. And about a week in, I started noticing this. And then about 2 weeks in, my wife, who's, she's just a skeptic and, wants to, is not going to take my word for it as her husband or the CMO of Akili. She wants to see for herself. She looked at me at the dinner table after Grayson said, he's just sitting there after his plate was done, talking to us, telling us about a kid at school, which he'd never done before. And she just looks at me, and I was like, yeah, all right, we got it. So, so I would say that don't expect immediate effects. Pay attention to the things where you think that the attentional control probably has the biggest impact, and watch those over time.
Is it the same game for children, adolescents, and adults?
For now, yes. We are going to constantly be updating and iterating and testing different things. We're going to be, Jacqueline, at some point. So I'm still thinking about your comment about CBT and therapy. No, because one of the things that and Adam and I have talked a lot about this, the promise of what a digital tool holds. Like, we have a great treatment and it works, and we're excited to get out there, but we're just getting started, and we've just scratched the surface of what we can deliver content wise, what data we can pull back and push out. So I want to test, how do we roll out CBT in a way that an ADHD brain is much more receptive to it? Not, okay, I got to do my Zoom call, or I got to go into my therapy once a week or twice a week or whatever. Like, that's a different paradigm. So stay tuned on that.
Maybe sort of just riffing off of where Scott was going about this being the beginning. I think that's really important to frame it that way, that this is a unique product and a first iteration, especially the OTC of a product that we are very excited about. We feel strongly about. We've done the work. Like I said, it's taken over a decade to get here, but we have a lot more we want to do. And there's a lot that we're excited about. And there's a lot of new technologies that are coming along that can be harnessed for this, from, things in the future like physiological recordings during gameplay, things like virtual reality, more immersive experiences. There's a lot of directions we can go, and a lot of other clinical conditions that can be helped by this, right? As the system works, you really sort of have to focus on one, bring it through this very high level of validation, and then get it to people. And we're a startup, we have a product, we need to really focus on that, and we have. But our vision is much broader. And it's also not just Akili. There are many, many companies. We just spent the whole day yesterday with a dozen other companies working on their own type of digital treatments for other conditions. And that's exciting. So the message that I want to say now is that this is not a new one-off treatment from some quirky company for one clinical condition. That this is a new field of medicine. This is a new type of medicine, like the pharma industry, which everyone knows, and it's global. That is the vision for the future of this. That we'll have a whole new category of medicine that will help people. It could maybe even allow us to reduce doses in pharma and be used together. There's so many interesting futures that are just unexplored right now. So if anything, I'd like your listeners, regardless of how they feel about this particular treatment for them, just to have an open mind about the future of medicine that we're presenting here, and all that we think that we'll be able to bring to people, because we have a very, very high level of need for people to have new solutions.
Well, and I wanted my last parting thought, emphasizing the need, specifically in ADHD right now at this moment in time. I mean, you guys mentioned the medication shortages. There are popular press articles every other week in The Economist, in the Washington Post, and Time Magazine, and The Atlantic about rates of adult ADHD diagnosis increasing. And to also emphasize that ADHD is not an inconvenience. Like, I think a lot of times, especially with the surge in mental health problems during COVID, lots of depression, lots of anxiety. People think, oh, ADHD, yeah, that's not as severe. That's just not the case. It affects people's lives. I talked to a woman the other day. I'll send you guys the info about this. She's remarkable. She started a nonprofit called the Inattentive ADHD Coalition, and she has a book coming out in maybe a couple of weeks. She's 80 years old. And she's a retired social worker, has devoted her life to kind of raising awareness about inattentive type ADHD. But she was telling me an anecdote from her book, and she told me just very straight up about this topic, that this is, it's more serious than many people think. She said, yeah, I killed my daughter. And I was like, whoa. And this is 30, 40 years ago. She was in the Peace Corps. She had a toddler. They were coming back from somewhere in Africa and had a whole bunch of anti-malarial drugs left over. She misplaced them, left them out. Toddler took them all, died the next day.
Oh my God.
And she said this was my life. It was like my keys or other stuff. And that's an important message that I think, I mean, that's a horrible message, but it is an important message for your listeners affected by this, that don't feel like that this is somehow more like trivial or a smaller deal than other mental health conditions, because it's not. Mm-hmm. And then combining that with the fact that we've got to continue to think and innovate new forms of treatment, it's so important.
I have one question just for curiosity's sake. It does not have to go on the podcast, but I was just wondering if you have thought about what a video game for depression or anxiety or something else would look like.
I'll bet Adam has thought about that. I haven't thought about that.
Yeah, well, the first thing I'd like to say is that this particular video game endeavor, which is the focus of our attention in this conversation, has lots of data, published data, that it improves conditions related to mood disorders like depression. And some of that is that attention is and attentional deficits is a is a part of major depressive disorder, right? So depression is not just about being sad, right? Sure, hopelessness and helplessness are part of the symptomatology of it, but there's also this fogginess and lack of concentration that is a part of many conditions, right? ADHD has it in its name. It's in great need. It is a great focus for us for this treatment, but any condition that has attention or fogginess is one that we could hypothesize would see benefit from this. And we have many populations, like even things like multiple sclerosis and other, lupus and early signs of dementia with aging that show benefit. So that is a benefit there. The other thing that's really interesting is that the mood aspects of depression, like being depressed and sad and hopeless, are also related to attention. And that's like a very interesting and newer way of looking at the processing that goes on in someone's brain when they have major depressive disorder, that they don't reappraise things, they process things too quickly. And so some of it is related to attention itself. And you could see in some of our research that you have attention benefits in people with depression, but even impact on mood as well. So that's something that we're very excited about, interested in pursuing both in research and maybe as a product. Here's a treatment for attention that we think would have benefits in people with depression. Not there yet, but that's an avenue that we're working on. And then aside from that, there's many, many other types of games that can be created by Akili. Other companies are working on at my center, Neuroscape at UCSF, that use different types of mechanics and puts pressure on different brain networks. For example, we have a meditation mindfulness game that is very different than the interactivity in Endeavor that's eyes closed, focused on your breath. We have another one focused more on empathy and compassion. We could use rhythm at a video game where you dance and move. And so again, back to the message that we're really excited about this game. It's what we have out there right now, and we're very proud of that. But this is the beginning of a much larger field where we will have different types of mechanics, different types of games that appeal to different people, and will have differential benefits in different conditions.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm excited. How can people find the game, or how can people learn more? Can you give a plug for anyone who's like raring to go to find Endeavor and want to dive into this?
Yeah, it's super easy. On the App Store, Endeavor, ENDEAVOROTC. And it'll pop right up and get started from there. You download the app, you onboard within the app, get an account going, get your subscription choices, and we're looking at different price points now. You can do monthly, you can do a yearly, and then you could probably be using the treatment within 2 minutes.
And I'd also like to say, if you put EndeavorOTC.com in your browser, it will also have a link to the App Store, but also have information that we talked about here related to the clinical trials and other things. Yeah. And it's also fair to say that there is an Endeavor RX out there too. And there are going to be kids and children that want access to that. And EndeavorRx.com is a way to find out all about that pathway.
Yeah. And one other, in addition to that, so there are different products in the kids. There's the core treatment is the same, but we've also got, it's a suite of tools. So there's a parent and caregiver companion app that goes along with the RX product to allow them to see progress in the game and get ratings and tracking and things like that. So that's we've spent most of the time kind of focused on the adult product.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you two so much for coming on. And for all of you listeners, if playing Endeavor would help you to remember to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, we say go out, play it immediately, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. By accessing this podcast, I acknowledge that the hosts of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of medical or any other professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The hosts do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement.